Hey everybody, welcome. Hey, I'm really glad you're here today. Hope you're having a fantastic day, staying healthy, happy, doing well. You know, it's all really important right now. So definitely reach out where you need to. And I hope that this video provides you some information that'll help you in your home mixes and even professionally. What we're talking about today is look-ahead compression. So if that hasn't been something that you've run across, or it's not a familiar term to you, or you'd like to learn more, then stick around. This video is definitely for you. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider joining the Audio Mix Chat Patreon. Every Sunday, I host a Twitter chat show that you can participate in by searching for, replying, and posting using the hashtag Audio Mix Chat. You can support this channel and future videos by joining the Patreon here. If you end up enjoying this video, please give me a like and subscribe for future videos like this. My name is Doug, and this is Resonance TV. So before we get started today, I wanted to take a few moments and talk about just what look-ahead compression is. But in order to better explain that, let's talk about sidechain compression, because it's the foundation for creating a look-ahead compressor. And sidechain compression is simply using one track to be a trigger for the compressor on another track. And we bring that in through some auxiliary channels, and the compressor will then use those auxiliary channels in order to trigger the compression. So it's not anything too difficult to set up. And we will set up a sidechain compressor first, so I'll show you that in just a few minutes. The look-ahead compression aspect of it is to basically set the compressor up to trigger virtually in a negative milliseconds position in time. So some compressors might only go down to 50 milliseconds attack times. Other ones, like the one I'm going to be using today, goes down to 0 milliseconds attack times. But with the look-ahead compression setup, we can actually go to negative compression attack times. For instance, maybe negative 50 milliseconds. And what that means is that the compressor is going to trigger prior to the transient that we actually would be limited to 0 milliseconds in this case of triggering the compressor. So anyway, I'll show you about that. But first, let's go ahead and go over into the DAW. I've set up a simple drum groove, and we'll just use that as an example for setting up a sidechain. In this case, it's going to be duplicated tracks, and that's going to be part of the setup for the look-ahead compressor. But we can talk about sidechain in that context as well. So looking over at the DAW now, like I said, I've got a series of tracks set up. This is a drum groove. We can listen to it here first. So with that, what I'd like to do is to focus on a few transients in the track of the snare drum, and mainly here, here, and here. And I'd like to do that without adversely affecting the transients in the other parts of the snare drum track. Now, we can do this with a compressor right on the track, but in order to illustrate sidechain, then I can set this up for you and use a technique for creating a duplicate track and using the duplicate track as the trigger for the compressor. And that'll lead us into, basically segue us into look-ahead compression. So a little bit more than we might normally do here, but the goal is to get to look-ahead compression. But if I can show you about sidechain in the process, then that's cool. You might otherwise use this for ducking the bass out of the way of the kick drum, for example. So you could use the kick to trigger a compressor on the bass in order to bring the bass down and allow the kick drum to come up when that happens. And by virtue of the bass having longer sustain than a drum does, then you can duck the transient of the bass attack down momentarily, allow the kick to come up, and then the bass to continue on after that. And so anyway, it's an effective approach to allowing the kick drum to come up through the mix. So you can use this technique for that. In this case, we're going to get to look ahead, and then we'll set up the sidechain here in the process. So we'll begin with that. And the first thing I need to do for setting up for look ahead is to duplicate the track that I want to apply the compressor to. So I'll do that here. Duplicate it. I'm going to change the color so we don't get confused. And I'll make that like green. Okay, so green is our duplicated track. It's track 5, and our original is track 4. And the first thing that we need to do in our setup is to route the trigger track over to the original track. So I'm going to, in Reaper, this is as easy as just dragging your IO over. In other DAWs, you might have to assign it to track 5 to route to track 4. So, but here, I'll drag that. And that pops up our track controls here. So I want to route the audio. So the audio coming from the trigger track is on channels 1 and 2. And if I did not do this and I left it on 1 and 2, then we would hear both of these. Okay, and I don't want that. So I'm going to modify that and make it route to channels 3 and 4. Okay, those are the auxiliary tracks that the compressor will use for triggering. And I also want to not send the trigger to the parent send because I don't want to hear this. I just simply want it to be a trigger and not audible. So I'll deselect that. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to send this pre-fader. And that's so nothing that I do to this track's fader control will have any effect on the level of the trigger signal that's going over to track 4. And with that, we're basically done with the trigger track. So if we come over to the track 4, the original snare track, we'll go ahead and add a compressor. I'm using the Recomp compressor in Reaper. It's the stock plugin. I think the prerequisite here is you can use any compressor as long as it has the ability to accept a sidechain to detect for compression. And I can kind of illustrate that here, what that looks like in the plugin connector. So our routing, if we look at this compressor has inputs 1 and 2 and also inputs 3 and 4. Okay, and those are the auxiliary inputs here. And those inputs are what we're going to use for our sidechain. And then everything goes out on tracks 1 and 2. I think other DAWs have similar functionality for your routing and have some sort of matrix that you can use to configure that routing. So additionally, you can actually modify and turn off here. So when this was coming in, it was all coming in on 1 and 2, which would have basically duplicated the track and made it louder because we'd just simply be playing both of the tracks over the top of each other, which we don't want, which is why I want to bring in those auxiliary tracks. So with our sidechain configured in that way, we're now accepting the trigger track as our for our detection on the compressor. We can go ahead and configure the compressor. I've made up a preset and we'll modify it. We'll look through it here a little bit. So I've got a look ahead compressor configured. Okay. And what we want to do here is take a look at the attack. So this attack on this compressor actually goes down to 0 milliseconds. Okay. And a lot of compressors may not go down that far, might be 50 milliseconds or 25, whatever. And you can use look ahead in order to get negative milliseconds look ahead so that your compressor will trigger prior to what the fastest millisecond attack time your compressor is able to do. So that's one of the really cool things about configuring look ahead is that you can have faster attack times than your compressor would otherwise allow you to have. Release in this case, I've got it starting out at 100 milliseconds. We may change this to flavor. So main thing is I want to adjust the release so that it's working on these high transients, but I want to make sure and kind of protect the following transients, like this one right here. If possible, I want to try and not clip the top of that off. I'm really just focusing on trying to manage the peak on this particular transient here and here and here. Okay, so then I currently have a ratio of 4:1, and the ratio is the amount of compression that we're actually going to apply. Okay, we don't need to worry about knee size in this case. And I don't need any high pass or low pass, so I'm going to take that out. It's really important here with the detector input. Again, as I said before, when this was originally configured, it was on the main input left and right, and that's channels 1 and 2. What we really want here is channels 3 and 4, which are the auxiliary inputs for left and right. So that's selected. And then I also want to use auto makeup gain, because whatever level reduction that we get from the compressor, I want that to be made up automatically. Now I can deselect that and work on that over here in my output, but this does a good job, and then I can refine that in the mix over here if I need to, if we're clipping or something like that. And we'll take a look at that once we get into it. And then finally, we're going to adjust the threshold of the compressor here, and we'll do that once we get started and see where our levels actually are. And so with that, we can go ahead and move this over here. We can go ahead and start playing this track, and I'll point out a couple things. So interesting to Reaper. Notice that we have an extra set of meters here now. So I can talk over that. With the second set of meters here, we're actually seeing the triggering track coming in for the sidechain. So it's really a useful feature in Reaper. Other DAWs may have similar functionality, but this lets you know that your auxiliary tracks and the levels on those auxiliary tracks are available now in that channel. So currently, in effect, we are sidechain compressing at this point. So we can dial this in a little bit more. Over here, you can see we're getting our compression. Here's our levels and our threshold. So we're just hitting the threshold right now. We're getting about a -3 to -4 gain reduction. And we are clipping a little bit. All right, so I adjusted a couple 0.2 dB down from where I was clipping. So I'm at 0 now. Maybe we'll go down just a little bit more. I'll go down to -3.2. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we can do the look ahead, because we're effectively successfully side chaining right now, but it's hard to tell because they're happening at the same time. So I'm going to make some room here on the left so that I can nudge this. And I'm going to delete that head. And what I'll do now is I'll do a nudge. Hit the wrong button. All right. So to nudge items here, I'm going to set this at 50 milliseconds, and I'm going to nudge this track to the left. So we'll see that happen here. Watch this track. Might have been too far out to actually see it. Or maybe I didn't have the track selected. There we go. So we'll nudge that left now. Okay, so I just moved this track ahead in time. And notice we're not hearing duplicates, because I don't have this outputting on channels 1 and 2, and I also don't have it routing out to the parent end. However, our compressor is now firing 50 milliseconds ahead of the actual transient on the original track. Might be hard to see because it's so fast, so let's exaggerate it. So watch right here. Compress. So see the compressor kicking in ahead of time before it hits here? Right there. Watch this in the timeline. So that's what we're effectively doing. So we're triggering that compressor ahead of when we want to apply it. I'll move this back. That's lined up again. And then I'll nudge that one time to get it back ahead. So now we can start adjusting to flavor this. So how much compression do we want? We'll set that threshold. And then on the release, we're at 100 milliseconds right now. So that compressor is about halfway completed by the time it hits the actual transient here, which might be about appropriate. So we'll leave that there. With a 4-to-1 compression, we want to do more. Just exaggerate it. Okay, I think the final tweak here, I just want to get rid of this clipping. So we're what? 1.5 dB too loud. So we'll go to about 4.8 here. That cleans up our clipping. And so now we're effectively created a look-ahead compressor, and we're firing off the compression 50 milliseconds prior to the transient that we want to work on. In the other cases, and about the only place that in this particular track we're concerned with is right here. We want to make sure and we're preserving that. So we've effectively reduced the overall level of these transients by using the look-ahead compressor. So anyway, it's pretty much that's all there is to it. So in this video, we covered looking at creating a sidechain and then adapting that into a look-ahead compressor. And certainly, if you have any questions on what I've done here, then leave comments below. And you can contact me on my website at rezoiso.com. The link will be down in the description. And hit me up with questions there personally if you need some help with something. And also, hopefully this helped you. And I wish you a great day and look forward to catching you in the next video. Have an awesome one.